to today's webinar on why accessibility is so important for native mobile apps. It's been a while since DQ has done a native mobile webinar, so we're very excited to have everyone join us today for this webinar. My name is Laura. I'm going to be helping moderate today's webinar. Just want to take care of a few housekeeping things before I pass it over to our presenters. So first, this webinar is being recorded. I will send the recording as well as the slides and transcript from today's webinar by email sometime next week. Secondly, we do have live captions. They seem to be working. We'll keep an eye on that throughout the webinar to make sure everything's running smoothly, but you can access those via Zoom. And then lastly, we're going to try to save about 10 minutes or so of today's webinar for Q&A. So please, if you have any questions along the way, feel free to put your questions in the Q&A tool within Zoom, and we'll make sure to get to those at the end. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to our presenters to get us started.
All right. Hi, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Obviously, you're all here today to hear about why accessibility is so important for native mobile apps. My name is Nithya, and I'm a native mobile software engineer specializing in iOS development here at DQ. And during today's webinar, I'll be talking about native mobile accessibility statistics and how to show, and also be showing how you can fix some of those real-world accessibility issues. And on this webinar, I'm also joined by Tim Harshbarger. Tim is a senior accessibility consultant at DQ specializing in training. Tim's assisted project teams in making their applications accessible for over 24 years. Tim is blind and a VoiceOver user and will be demoing how to use VoiceOver with an iOS app. So just to set the agenda for today, we're going to be covering a couple different things. We're going to start off with some facts about how mobile accessibility provides greater opportunities for people with disabilities and for your business. We're going to go through a live demo of an iOS VoiceOver screen reader, thanks to Tim. And then we'll discover how to overcome some of those native mobile accessibility challenges using the right scope, tools, and program. And then we'll finish it off with Q&A, like Laura mentioned. So we're going to start off with that intro to native mobile accessibility. So the biggest question I'm sure everyone has is, why should you care about native mobile accessibility? Well, in our opinion, it's the right thing to do, and I think that's the biggest part of it. But there's also a couple other things that can probably convince your business to go into making your apps accessible. The first one is it opens up your business to a significant market share. And the next one is that it saves your organization from a lot of costly lawsuits, complaints, and unhappy and lost customers. And we'll go into some statistics on both of those points in the next couple of slides. So as you all probably know, native mobile apps have become more and more prevalent with everyone having a mobile phone. Right now, there are more than 6.56 billion smartphone users in the world, with this number growing every single year. An industry survey, shows that the preference for mobile app usage has actually increased to 51.8% in 2021. This is up from 50.8% in 2019 and 46% in 2017. And then respondents of the same survey also indicated that they're more likely to carry out an action using a mobile app rather than web. One way to show this is with e-commerce applications. Because the flow on mobile applications is so seamless and quick, people prefer to use a mobile app over the web. It's also important to know that when I say everyone, I mean this includes users with disabilities. In the US, 26% of adults who own a smartphone, which is about 1 in 4 adults, have a disability. And 90% of screen reader users do have a mobile device. So they are relying on mobile devices and mobile applications to get through their days. And so it's important to make sure that your apps can work seamlessly with those screen readers and provide a good experience for users with disabilities. And native mobile apps have also become important for your business. With the total US population at 332 million people, and 85% of them owning a smartphone, that comes out to 282 million people in the world or in the US with a smartphone. And then from our previous slide, that statistic of 26% of people with disabilities having a smartphone, that tells us that there's 73 million people in the US who you could be catering to. And then to put this into money, I guess, people with disabilities in the US control an aggregate annual income of over $1 trillion. So that's a really large part of the economy. And that 26% that we talked about doesn't include family, friends, and caregivers for people with disabilities. So if we consider how those people are negatively affected, that number jumps from 26% to 73% of the population being affected. And that is a significant chunk of the 282 million people. And then we can't forget about the legal costs. Since 2018, digital accessibility lawsuits have more than exploded. In 2021 alone, there were more than 4,000 lawsuits, and 2022 is following the same numbers. Following those statistics, more than 100 different companies in various industries were sued for inaccessible apps, with the e-retail industry topping it off with 25% of the cases. As you mentioned, e-retail has become a really important part of the mobile sphere, so that statistic is very clear to understand. Just to give you an example of a big corporation, in 2008, Target Corporation settled for $6 million US, and that doesn't include the $3 million US in plaintiff legal fees that they had to pay. So clearly, this is a significant cost to your business. And at this point in time, any organization can be the target of an accessibility complaint or a lawsuit. And this report, these numbers are really only for the federal complaints and lawsuits that make it to court. So there's plenty more besides these. So you're probably wondering, how can I get started with mobile accessibility? How can I start testing my applications and make sure that I'm where I need to be? Well, there's two parts to it. The first is having testing that considers the whole experience for all users. And you can do that by moving through an app manually as a person with disabilities would to find your errors. And the second part is automating and simplifying the process. Automating and integrating can help you really smooth out that process. But there's a couple big challenges that come with this. For the first part of it, you might run into questions of, does the flow of the app make sense? Where are the traps that our users with disabilities could fall into? What doesn't work? And how can I fix it? And then once you get into automating and integrating, there's a possibility that you get lost in your data. You get questions like, how can I get rid of duplicates, but still make sure I'm fixing all of them? How can I make sure I'm integrating accessibility into my software development lifecycle? And then how can I send the right issues to the right people so they're not overwhelmed with information? And then how can I see a report on our progress? How can I make sure that we're on the right track to reaching our goals? And it's important to do both automated and manual testing, but it's also really easy to get lost in your data. So how can you improve that process? There's three different things: setting the right scope, using the right tools, and developing a program to help you prioritize your testing. With this comes automating everything that you possibly can, and then organizing your entire testing process to be sustainable over time. So to get through this, we can start with scope. The first part of scope is it's important to know what type of application you're developing for. It seems like one of our text has disappeared, but on screen you see a native app, you see a hybrid app, and then you see a web app on the far right. And these are the different types of applications. It's important to realize what you're developing, as there are different ways to implement accessibility. And one way that you can set goals for yourself and build consistency is to use independent accessibility standards like WCAG, or for Europe, their adaptation of WCAG. And WCAG stands for the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. These are the standard for digital accessibility that were published by the World Wide Web Consortium. They have a set of rules as well as different levels of conformity, so that you can set goals for yourself based on those and make sure that you're hitting everything you need to be addressing. And the next on our list was having the right tools. It's important to make sure that you have the tools to help you organize your data, make sure that you are getting the right information to the right people, not getting lost in your data. And one tool is, of course, Axe DevTools. Axe DevTools Mobile is a technology that provides you with that clear testing that you need, that provides you with the context that considers the whole experience for all your users, and also has the ability to focus and share meaningful testing information. You can get the right information to the right people. You're not getting lost in your data. And now for some examples of how this works and what it means to your native app users. We're going to have Tim do a quick demo of an iOS sample app. Just for context, this sample app was developed by us, and it is a way to show a couple inaccessible examples, and we're going to have Tim use VoiceOver to highlight how that experience might be different for users with disabilities.
Great. Just a second here. Let me get sharing my screen. Okay. Is it sharing?
Yep, we can see your screen share starting.
Axe DevTools iOS sample app, search field.
And we are here at the end. So let me quickly explain to you that, so for on iOS, the screen reader is VoiceOver. If you're using Android, they have also a screen reader built in called TalkBack. But I'll be using VoiceOver. Now, one thing to know about VoiceOver is when you turn on a screen reader on a touch interface, it changes the gestures. So things work a little differently. And honestly, that if when you think about it, that should be obvious, right? When you use a touch interface, you look at something, you see what you want to touch, you take your finger, you touch it, right? You tap and it activates. For someone like myself, who's totally blind, I don't know what's on the screen, so I have to be able to explore, see what's there, know what's there, and then activate it. So one thing you'll go as I'm going through, I'll explain some of the gestures. But one way I can do that is use Explore by Touch, where I just take my index finger
Limit chat button.
and I just move it around the screen.
Search field. Search field.
That's one way I can do it. Another way I can do it is here I am with the focus at the top, and I'm just going to swipe left and right. And if you're used to a keyboard, it's kind of like tapping through an interface, except for I'll go through all the elements, whether they're interactive or not. You'll notice there's a highlight at the top that's always going to be moving, and it's going to show you where the screen reader is focused at. And you're going to see a caption window at the bottom. If you have trouble understanding the speech, just look at that. That will tell you what it's saying. I have it right now at the speed I normally listen to my VoiceOver, partly to give you an idea of what this is like. So, okay. So they've asked me to go through here and pick the fourth item. Now you're going to find out why we had to say pick the fourth item, because this is supposed to be an example of a problematic apps. So
Search field.
So here that it says search field. So that tells me it's a search field. So what I'm going to do is swipe right, and it's going to take me to the next element.
Winter 2022 best collection.
So you heard that, Winter 22 best collection.
Limited number of products.
Limited number of products. So again, it's just reading me text right now. So this is information I know. Realize as someone who's blind, the only information I know about this interface is basically what the screen reader is telling me.
Chat button. Limited number chat button.
There's a check button,
Most popular.
a most popular piece of text.
56 items button.
Says 56 items button. Not sure what that's about. Maybe.
Heart button. Heart.
Okay, there's a heart button. Actually, first time I heard it, I thought it said part, but it's a heart button, evidently.
Exploronic life.
Then it says Exploronic Life. I'm not sure what that is.
Bag shop button.
It says Bag Shop button. I'm supposed to add
$26.
and $26. And then let's see what happens when I swipe right again.
Heart button. Heart.
Up again, another heart button. So I'm gonna guess that this is the list of items, since it seems to repeating more frequently now.
Exploronic life.
Not sure what that is.
Bag shop button.
Let's see here.
$26.
Another, okay, $26. Hopefully I'm not repeating the same thing over again.
Button.
Another heart button.
Exploronic life.
Exploronic Life.
Bag shop button.
Notice here where it says Bag Shop button. right? That enroll information button is what tells me I can interact with this, where
$26.
it says $26, just because it says $26 and there's no role like button or checkbox or switch. I assume this is just regular text. Let's see. I think this.
Heart button.
Okay, heart button.
Survive.
Survive.
Back shop button.
Bag shop. So this is the item I think I'm looking for.
$125.
So I'm about to pay $125. I'm really not sure what I'm going to be getting here. So the question is, how do I select this item?
Heart button. Heart.
Yeah, there's another heart button. So
$125.
$125.
Back shop button. Survive. Heart.
So
button.
I think this heart button,
Survive.
survive,
Back shop button.
and bag shop belong to
$125.
$125, but I really don't know. It could belong to this heart,
Exploronic life.
Exploronic Life,
Back shop button.
bag shop.
Exploronic
So
heart. Back shop button.
I'm going to guess maybe bag shop might, let's see. I'm going to go ahead and double. So here's how I activate as a screen reader user. Instead of just tapping with your finger, you double tap.
Back shop bold.
Okay, now it told me bag shop bold.
125. Back shop bold button.
So I'm not really sure what that means. I assume it's now bolded, whatever is in that button. But again, I'm not sure what I've just done. Not sure if I've added it to a cart, what I'm paying for. I know it's going to cost me I'm fairly certain it's either going to cost me $26 or $125. But so you got to get an idea of that process. Is there anything else you guys want me to show them before I show them the tab bar at the bottom?
Oh, I think that's good.
Okay, so let me also show you the tab bar at the bottom. So this is honestly one reason I like to use native mobile apps is because often the interface is, there's a lot less going on there. And a lot of times they have the tab bar at the bottom that lets you switch between different parts of the app. So it's very easy for me as a screen reader because, as I was just swiping, well, I can just use Explore by touch.
Exploronic life. $26. Tab bar. Tab 2 of 4.
And I can move down here to the tab bar.
Selected. Home.
And I can quickly see the different parts of the app. I was just recently using that where it's like, oh, here's the home, here's the search, here's our options tab. And so I like that personally because it makes it easy.
120. Back shop button.
So it's, oops.
Tab bar. Selected. Home.
So
Tab.
here it says tab, it's a tab. It tells me it's a tab, tells me it's a selected and it's home. So let me go to the next one. I'll swipe right.
Tab 2 of 4.
Okay. Now it just told me tab 2 of 4. So what's that telling me as a screen reader user? It's a tab. The screen reader thinks there's 4 of them, and this is the second, and home was the first. I have no idea what selecting it's going to do
Tab 3 of 4.
because it doesn't have any name, and there's 3 of 4.
Tab 4 of 4.
And that missing name right there basically puts me in a limbo because the only way I'm going to find out what it is if I tap it. And of course, I always reluctant to tab links and buttons and tabs that have no name because I'm not sure what in the world that might do and what it might alter. So, but that's kind of a quick thing. I'll just show you one other quick thing here. When I was going to swiping, I can also move around different ways. If you pretend like you take your index finger and thumb and like you're twisting a knob,
Words.
you can hear it saying,
Speaking rate. 65. Volume. 100.
this allows me to change different things about the voice rate.
Audio ducking. Lock.
So
Punctuation. None.
I can do that kind of thing,
Containers.
change settings or move around
Headings.
like by headings, right?
Heading not found.
There are no headings on this, but if I swipe up and down, it's going to move by headings. And it's just telling me that kind of stuff. So that's just a quick view of a screen reader using VoiceOver.
Thank you so much, Tim.
Sure. You may want to take back screen control because who
yeah.
knows what happen when I try to give it to you.
Oh, it looks like I can't screen share until you stop,
Okay, let's see
unfortunately.
here.
Zoom. Input message. Minimize web message received. Melissa. You are using enhanced chat. Button. Share. Button.
Okay.
Chat. Raise my hand. Button.
Hey, Laura, can you take it away from me?
Yeah, let me see if I can give that a go.
Yeah,
The
please take it away from me, Laura.
Message received. Message.
Let me-
Ellipsis. Lauren Ann Humer, she, her, has started screen sharing.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
Yeah, I think that did it.
Yes,
Okay,
it
got
just
it.
told, I
Thank
heard
you.
it say that you took it over. Thank you.
Yep.
All right, hopefully you can see the presentation again. All right, we've gotten through our demo. All right, so actually saw a lot of nice things in the chat. This is one of your examples of why manual testing as well as automated testing are very important. So I'm going to go through a couple of the issues that Tim found on screen and then talk through a couple of ways to fix them and how we could improve that experience for a voiceover user. So the first of them is name, role, and value. Assistive technology users like Tim should be able to understand the function of any element on screen. And to do this, it's important to have a clear name, role, and value to go with it. So the biggest thing we saw was bag shop. For one, the icon doesn't necessarily tell us what's doing. So a visible icon would be very useful, or a better visible icon. But to make this better, just by going through the name, role, and value, instead of bag shop, we can try something like add to cart. Sorry. Here we also have a gray role button, really easy to understand. And I guess one other thing I'd like to point out is to make sure that your name doesn't have the word button in it, because that can be extremely repetitive for a voiceover user to hear. And then similarly, once we have the bag shop icon selected, instead of bag shop bold, we would try something like remove from cart, depending on the function of the item. It's important to know, or I guess it's important to point out that bag shop and bag shop bold are simply the default names for these icons. So we've done nothing of this, like no sort of adding of a label or a name to make this accessible. This is just what the default icon is named. The next thing I'd like to look at is another name, role, and value. But as you might have seen on at the last part of Tim's demo, he was able to use a rotor to control different parts of VoiceOver. And one of those options is to go through the screen via containers or headings. And so if you were to go through with headings, we can see on the screen that there were different things like most popular, collection, recommended. And so it would be significantly easier for him to navigate that screen and not have to go through every single item below it if those were marked as headings. So adding a role of heading to those relevant items would make that possible. It's really small at the bottom of the screen here, but collection currently has no role, it's just collection. So if we were to add a role of heading to it, that would help us hear collection heading, and you can skip through those parts on the screen.
It would also clearly indicate to me, oh, I'm in a new item. All the things after this until the next heading are related to this new item. So
exactly, yeah. Instead of just knowing or thinking that it's regular text on screen, like Exploronic Life or Survive.
Yes.
All right, and then the next part we're going to go into is non-textual context on screen. As we saw, it would have been helpful for Tim to know exactly what he was buying, because Exploronic Life and Survive don't really tell him too much about what he's trying to buy. So there are some cases where images on screen present useful information to assistive technology users. And in those scenarios, it's a good idea to make them accessibility enabled, for one, and then also important to add a concise description that can help the user understand what it is and have a better experience. So in our demo, Tim was trying to buy this item on the right, the Survive hoodie for $125. So it might be useful to, one, make this voiceover focusable, and then give a description like black hoodie with orange block text. I'm sure the designer of the hoodie would have a better description for it, but that would be a start to helping Tim understand what he's trying to buy. And then
By the way, I now know what I was trying to buy.
You're welcome. I hope that helps a little bit. But yeah, we can make this experience even better by trying to group this information or determining even focus order, basically helping the voiceover user understand how all of these elements on screen relate to one another. So one way we can make this, sorry, 1 second. One way we can make this better for our voiceover users or assistive technology users is to group the information on screen. As we saw when Tim was doing his demo, he had to swipe 4 different times to get through this one element. And he didn't really know which part like whether the $26 belong to the current item or the next one on screen. And so we can improve the experience by grouping all these elements together so that the voiceover user hears everything at once, but also can access the actions of the heart button and the bag shop icon. To do this, you would need to add a custom action, make sure that the heart or like button and then the bag shop or add to cart button are both accessible. And this way, if there's 10 different items in a screen, Tim only has to really swipe 10 different times rather than, what is that, 40 different times. And then the final one, this is something that Tim didn't particularly cover in his demo, but it's still a very important part of accessibility, is being able to resize text on screen. 1 in 3 users choose to adjust the text size on their phones, whether that's smaller or bigger. And if text size doesn't properly resize, users may not be able to read the text properly, but also content on screen could be visually shifted around and lost. And you can check that text resizes by using accessibility settings on your device, checking whether your text increases appropriately and decreases appropriately. But obviously, this can be quite time consuming to go through and check that every piece of text adjusts on screen. And that's where I want to segue into our tools, AxDev Tools Mobile. I've already taken a couple of scans of the application. We're going to go into the home screen, which is what Tim was looking at. We can see a quick little summary of how many issues we have. We see 19. Let's click into it and see how many more we have. So we can see the proper breakdown here. We have screen orientation, touch target size, color contrast, and active control name, and a different number of each of them. Screen orientation is telling us that we didn't enable landscape mode. So if the user were to flip this phone, they would not see the landscape version of it. It would just be portrait to the side. We also have touch target size. I'll just open into one of these. It's telling us that the heart button is not big enough. It doesn't match the 44 by 44 point minimum requirement. And it also tells us what the current width and height are, so we can go ahead and fix that. And then, like I was talking about with dynamic type or adjusting text sizes, that's not something you want to necessarily go into every single time manually and do. So that's where an automated test suite could help. Here we have all of these supports dynamic type issues. There's 8 different ones on this screen alone. It's telling us where the font is. It highlights us for us as well. And we can then go in and make sure that all of these static text items are adjustable for the user. And then with this tool, you can also go ahead and inspect and see the hierarchy, see exactly where those issues are. You can also go through the screen, go to specific elements. But this is just one way to highlight how automated testing as well as manual testing really go hand in hand. And it's important to do both of them together. This tool also allows you to make sure that the right data is getting to the right people. When you go into a specific issue, you can go ahead and copy link to this specific issue, make sure that someone's not getting lost in all of these different things that pop up. I'm sure there's instances where there's even more issues to be found. And in that scenario, it's too time consuming to go through each and every one of them to see what you're looking for. But that's just one of the features that our tools have to offer. Let me go ahead and go to the next slide. So we've talked about setting the scope. We've talked about using the right tools, AxDev tools. But the next part is developing a program and making sure that you stick with it, because digital accessibility is not something that you can necessarily finish. It's definitely a journey or a process that you have to keep going at and keep working on. And I guess one important thing is that starting early and integrating this process into your software development cycle can really help you catch those issues sooner, save you costs, time, and a lot of effort. But that's all I have for today's webinar. If there's any questions, we'd be happy to take them at this time.
Awesome. Great job, Nitya, and great job as well, Tim. Thank you for that really great demo. People really enjoyed it. Looking through the chat so far. So this is the time where if you have questions, feel free to put those in the Q&A part of Zoom, and we'll get to them. I'm going to go ahead and start off with the ones we have so far. Scroll through. Oh, this is an interesting question. Tim, do you have an example of an experience or an app that you find particularly accessible that you would like to call out? I always find that it's important to highlight the native mobile apps that are doing a really good job for accessibility.
So I'm always a little reluctant to this because there is no perfection, right? And apps can change over time too. So depending on what's going internally in the company, something that's not very accessible today can be accessible tomorrow, and something that's accessible today could not be accessible tomorrow. So I'm always a little hesitant. I mean, I use some different apps. A lot of the native Apple apps, the ones that come on the phone pre-installed, those tend to be pretty accessible and usable. So that's typically good news. I occasionally will use Instacart on my phone. There's some aspects of that app that are good. Again, there's some other things about it that aren't so good. So, but yeah, that I would say typically most of the time, the ones that are probably on the better end of the scale, Apple tends to try to, the ones that are native to to iOS, it tends to try to make those as accessible as possible.
Great, thanks, Tim. And yeah, I think that speaks to Nitya's point about accessibility being a journey. It's something that's always in flux and something you need to stick to. Nitya, I think this is a question for you. Can you use the Axe DevTools mobile only on your own apps during development, or is there a possibility to test it on existing apps from other companies? I guess, could you speak to more about how you go about using Axe DevTools mobile?
Yeah, so Axe DevTools Mobile is a framework that integrates into your code. So it would have to be on an app that you are developing or have access to, not necessarily, or it would not be able to be used on another company's app. I hope
And
that answers that question.
yeah, I guess a follow-up question. So when you use Axe DevTools mobile, are you using it on mobile devices? Are you using it on a simulator? How do you go about using it?
Yeah, so when I ran my scans, that was on a simulator. So I was able to run that simulator from Xcode, test it out right there. But there's also, you're also able to use a device with it. It just depends on which device you decide to deploy your app to.
Great. Gonna go through some more questions here. Nitya, I'm not sure if you could speak to this question, but could you talk to how Axe DevTools mobile works with Android accessibility?
Unfortunately, I am not the best person to be asking this question, so I don't have an answer for you, but we can definitely answer that question after the webinar.
Yeah, sorry, I know you're iOS specific, so to the person who asked that question, we'll make sure to follow up via email. Does Axe DevTools mobile support native Swift?
Yes, it does. We support Swift and Swift UI as well.
Great, thanks, Nitya. This is an interesting question. Are there advantages of only keeping a responsive site for mobile over a native app?
I'm sorry, I don't know if I understood the question fully.
Okay, we can come back.
Okay.
We can come back to it. Maybe it's a difficult one, but I think they're asking, should you maintain a responsive site for mobile over a native app?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not sure how to answer that question.
Okay. All right,
Sorry.
I'll move on to the next one.
Is that from an accessibility standpoint?
Yeah, I wonder if you had to answer
From
from
an
an
accessibility standpoint, whether to use a responsive or native mobile. I mean, the fact is both can be made accessible, so
Okay.
that really, if you're looking at which one to use, that's probably not going to be your defining thing that determines whether you use one or the other, unless you're using something custom or, again, libraries or frameworks, you have to think about that. But the fact is both can be made fully accessible. So
Mhm.
from that standpoint, they both can work pretty well.
Awesome. Thanks. And I think this is a follow-on question to that. What kind of precautions should be kept in mind when you're testing hybrid apps versus native apps?
Mm, yeah, I'm also not.
A
I
lot of the
personally haven't had an experience with
Right. A lot of the
hybrid
testing
apps.
is gonna be largely the same. Really the difference is how you solve problems in those environments. So again, if you're using a hybrid app, you're going to be using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript behind the scenes. So for some of the app, and so you're going to use accessibility solutions that are based on those type of techniques. Whereas if you're using Swift or something like that, you'll use a different set of accessibility techniques to solve those problems. But as far as the considerations, the type of issues you deal with, the type of testing you do, they're going to be very similar. Again, you might use different tooling for some from different things, but again, it's a lot of those things are going to be similar across the board.
Thanks, Tim. That's super
Sure.
helpful. I'll keep going through some questions here. We have so many, so apologies. I'm reading through them as they're coming in. Tim, could you quickly cover once again, just so people have this at ready? Could you cover how you use gestures and taps when you're interacting with your mobile device on native mobile?
Sure. So there are quite a few gestures, and there's ways to look those up and see what they are, both for voiceover and talkback. And talkback gestures are going to be different, although a lot of the functionality is very similar, because if you're using a screen reader, no matter what device you're going to use it on, you kind of need to do similar kind of things. So on voiceover, I'm going to tell you there's probably, let's see, six basic gestures. No, okay, seven. But here they are quickly. So one is explore by touch. That's where you take your index finger or whatever and drag it around. And as you move it around, it's going to read whatever your finger moves over. You're going to see the little focus rectangle on there. Another one is to explore by or to move through the interface by swiping. And what you do is you take your finger and you touch it maybe to the top of the screen or somewhere on the screen, wherever you want to start. And then you swipe right. And what it will do is move to the next element on the page that the screen reader can read. And if you swipe left, it will move backwards through the elements on the page that it can get to. If you want to activate an element, you have to double tap. And basically you take your finger and just tap twice real quickly. Tap, tap. The other three gestures are the rotor gesture, which basically says, hey, I don't want to move. I want to move by headings right now, or I want to read by character, or I want to I want to find the next image. And basically what you do is you take your forefinger and index finger, thumb, and you pretend like you're turning a knob, like a dial. And as you turn it, you're going to hear it read different things. And of course, you'll see something on the screen too that's going to tell you what it's set to. Then you take your finger, lift your fingers off the screen, and that's what it's set to. Well, then you just use the swipe down and then swipe up. And when you swipe down, for instance, if your headings, it's going to move to the next heading on the page if there is one. If you swipe up, it moves to the previous. So basically swiping left, right, up, down, the rotor gesture and double tap will take care of most of what you want to do. And of course, the explore by touch. So there are a lot more gestures you can use as a screen reader user on VoiceOver, but those are the ones that probably get used most frequently. And if you're doing testing, those are probably the ones that you'll want to use to test out your app.
Great, thanks, Tim. I think you covered this, Tim, but this is probably worth covering once again. Is what is more user-friendly to you? Do you prefer using a native mobile app or a web browser for doing day-to-day activities?
I find I like to use native mobile apps just because often web pages have lots of content. And the nice thing is usually native mobile apps tend to minimize that, using the tab along the bottom to make it easy to switch. And of course, it all fits on one screen, right? The screen usually doesn't necessarily scroll. I mean, some of them do, but so that can be a little faster than working with a web page where some of the content is off the screen, so you have to get down to that content using various ways. But honestly, both can be effective on a phone or a touch device. And so there's probably some personal preference in that, based, if you ask somebody different, they may have a different opinion on that too.
Awesome, thanks, Tim. I'm gonna keep scrolling through the chat. Feel free to put your questions in Q&A as I do that. And just a reminder, because I know this question has come up quite a bit, we are going to send the recording and slides out by email next week. So do not fret, those will be coming via email from me. Keep looking. And Nitya, if you see any in chat while I'm scrolling through, feel free to grab them.
Yeah.
I know there was one question about, somebody was asking about, as designers, how can you help developers, right, know what they need to do? And honestly, part of that's going to be having discussions with your developers, but part of that's going to be trying to find ways to include that information in your UI designs and documentation to let them know about that. So using that kind of thing to document that in the wire diagrams. And passing that information along. And the fact is, I think someone else asked who's responsible for accessibility, and really everybody can play a part in accessibility. The developer, the designer, the QA person, the project manager, the business analyst, everybody has a part they can play in making sure things are accessible. And one of the things that works out great is if everybody gets enough understanding, gets the tooling they need to do their piece, and of course then pass it along to the next person who can do their work to make it accessible.
Thanks for grabbing those out of chat, Tim. That's super helpful. This is an interesting question, and I think it's worth addressing. Can you specify the order in which elements within a group are announced? So if we think back to the demo app, what order would the elements that are grouped together be announced in? Would it be the image, then the title, then the price, then the cart, or what is the best order?
If this question is asking if it's possible to change it, it is possible to change the focus order. As for what the best order would be, I think Tim would have a better opinion on that.
It probably, as you probably noticed with the screen reader, kind of work from the top of the screen down. So a lot of times it's better if, like, for instance, in that case, you had the name of the item, you knew what it was, and then all the other information appeared in whatever order made sense after that. That way, so like having the heart icon, right, button. Okay, I assume I know now that that's a favorite, like like or something like that. But if I come across that, right, my first thing is that for the previous thing or the next thing? If I have a heading there that says here's the name of the item, and then I have all those buttons and other things that follow it, then I'm more likely to make the assumption, oh, these all must be about this current item, that survive hoodie. Oh, I guess came to the next heading. Now I'm going to go on to items that pertain to that. So that's probably a little better in the reading order for a screen reader user, because again, as you notice, even though it's the screen is two-dimensional, the process of moving through there with a screen reader by swiping is very linear.
Awesome. Thank you, Tim. Okay, keep going.
Someone had asked, oh,
Go
sorry.
ahead. Go ahead, Nidya. Go ahead.
Someone had asked how you can actually resize text in the app. You can go into accessibility settings and resize that. Or if you are using a simulator, instead of having to go through all that trouble, the accessibility inspector that Xcode provides allows you to resize text right in the moment.
Thanks, Nidya. Here's a question that I think Tim would be a good one for you is when you double tap to activate within a native mobile app, should the focus be at the very top or what is your expectation as a user?
Basically, my expectation is that when I double tap on the screen to activate something, it's whatever I last heard the screen reader talk to me about. So that should be where the screen reader focus. And just so you know, the way it works is that you see that little rectangle, if you can see what the rectangle is, and that's going to be where the current focus is. The fact is, once I have the focus there, I can actually double tap anywhere on the screen and activate that because that's what the screen reader is focused on. So that's what it's going to basically, when you double tap, that's the thing it's going to click. There's no expectation that it's going to be at the top of the screen. Basically, for activating an element, it's just whatever element you're wanting. You're wanting to ensure the focus is on whatever element you're activating.
Awesome. Thanks, Tim.
Sure.
And if you see any questions or comments you'd like to address in chat, feel free to pull those out. I'm just scrolling through as well. So I know we have about 12 minutes here and there are lots of questions, so I want to make sure that we get those answered for folks.
I'm seeing a couple questions again about running Access Tools Mobile. I'm not sure if those were already answered, but just to clarify, it's a framework that you would embed into your software. And then when you run on a device or a simulator, you'll see a little floating button pop up on screen. And then whichever screen you navigate to, you can tap on that button. It'll send a scan to our desktop, and that's where you can view all your results. And then you should be able to share those scans as well. And just to add on to, I don't know if I might have confused someone with my Android response, but there is an Android equivalent to this. I just don't have the knowledge to speak about it, unfortunately.
Yep, we'll make sure to follow up with folks, especially if there's tool-related questions that we didn't get to. We'll make sure that we'll follow up. But if any questions are in Q&A that we don't get to, we'll try to do our best to follow up via email afterwards. This is an interesting question. I think the person is asking how long does it take for someone to become proficient with using mobile accessibility features like the VoiceOver and Rotor. And I think this kind of speaks to something we haven't talked about, which is the importance of, developers trying to use VoiceOver to test their apps, but also the importance of, doing usability testing for accessibility. And I don't know if Nidya or Tim, either of you would like to speak to that.
Sure. So as a developer, when you're testing with the screen reader, really you're trying to make sure that the techniques you use to make the interface accessible are working correctly. The one thing is how long it takes to use it. I personally think using screen reader on a touch device is probably, again, a little easier to learn than on desktop. Just because I think there's the swipe gestures may be a little easier to remember than all the keystrokes. But they can both take time because as a developer, right, you're not only listening to what the screen reader is saying, but you're going to have to learn what do you expect it to say. Oh, I expected it to announce switch and that it's on or off. I expect it to say it's a button. So that takes a little time to learn and get used to. The difference between doing that and doing a usability test is the fact is when you're testing, you need to be using your eyes to see what's on the interface and what's going on, and using your ears to see what the screen reader, or using the little caption window to see what the screen reader is saying, and then asking yourself, is it everything I need to make accessible accessible? In a usability test, remember, you can use your eyes, so you can always cheat, and it's honestly can be very easy to think something is accessible and you overlook that something didn't get read just because you're used to seeing it. With a usability test, you're going to get a much better idea of how a real user uses that app, who's blind. You're also going to get additional feedback. So not only will you spot some WCAG issues, particularly ones that are serious and critical, but you're also going to find out some things about how to improve the overall user experience beyond just making it accessible.
Awesome. Thanks, Tim. I think that was worth mentioning, so I appreciate that really insightful answer. I'm just scrolling through the chat. Sorry, y'all. There's so many, but I appreciate everybody's dedicated interactions. Always makes for a great Q&A portion, so I appreciate your patience as I'm reading through these. Tim, is there a common design issue within native mobile apps that you wish you didn't exist? Maybe that, this is a way to kind of comment on common trends you're seeing that make an inaccessible experience.
Really, I think the problem I've seen that's probably the biggest that I've heard people complain about most is when you have either items like you noticed on this one that had no good label or had a missing name, like the tabs at the bottom with no name, or you have the thing that says bag shop button and you're thinking, what's a bag shop button do? So that's one. The other thing is things that are missing roles. So it's an interactive element, but it just reads like text. So then you have to start guessing at, okay, I read through this whole page. I didn't see anything that was interactive. What in the world do I interact with? I guess I'll just start double tapping around the page till something happens, and hopefully it's what I want to happen. So those are probably the two things that I've seen most frequently, and usually seen on sites where people comment about this kind of stuff. It seems to be the things they comment the most about.
Awesome, thank you. That's very helpful. Nitya, this might be one for you. I don't know if you could speak to ARIA usage in iOS and Android, and if there are any general considerations for using ARIA in mobile.
Unfortunately, I don't know much about ARIA in relation to mobile. I'm wondering if we may be able to answer that question later, or if Tim might know about this.
Yeah. So if you're using hybrid maps, we're using HTML, you may be able to use ARIA in that case. But if you're using like Swift or something like that, you'll use their accessibility API for doing that. So they have different ways of doing something similar. So that's often the difference. If you're used to working with web and you work on native mobile, that's really where the difference is. You can do a lot of the same things. They may be called different. They may use different names. They don't necessarily, it's like for Swift, have something called ARIA, but they typically will have some other way of doing some of those type of things.
Awesome, thanks for that clarification. Another question, does Axe DevTools mobile support Flutter? I'm not sure if I'm saying this right, Xamarin, .NET, Maui, React Native, etc.
Can you repeat that, Laura? I missed it.
Yeah, does Axe DevTools mobile support Flutter, Xamarin, .NET Maui, or React Native?
I don't want to speak or say the wrong thing. I believe this is mentioned in our documentation. I can link that in here. But yeah, sorry, that's the answer I'm gonna have to give.
No worries, we will answer that offline. A lot of good questions here. Tim or Nitya, do you have any best practices or places that you recommend people go to learn more about native mobile accessibility?
I'm trying to think about where I started learning. Um, um, I know DQU had a course that I went through when I first started. And I think that was a good intro to native mobile accessibility or just accessibility in general. Um, but after that, I think it was a lot of playing around with voiceover. Um, but I don't have any resources besides that, unfortunately.
No worries. Yeah,
I do
DQ.
believe that's like on the on, and it's been a while since I've looked at that site, but Apple's dev environment, I think they do have some documentation on accessibility in there
That's
that you can
true.
read through. So that can help. And like you said, it's really honestly experimenting is always a good way of helping yourself learn some of this stuff, playing around with it. Honestly, I do that myself even now, even though I've been doing this for years. I'll still create little experiments to test things out to make sure they're going to work the way I think they're going to work, or figure out how exactly they do or don't work.
Awesome. Thanks, all. Yeah. And some people have posted some checklists in chat. And of course, DQU has some iOS and Android native courses. So we'll make sure to share those as well. I think we have time for about one more question here. Tim, this one's for you. What, in your opinion, is the most accessible mobile experience of a progressive web app?
I'm not really sure, to be honest.
Okay.
What would fit that bill? Again, like I said, there are really no perfect apps. There are definitely ones that are better than others, and again, it's that can change more frequently than I'd like it to change. Well, actually, except for when it improves, it's great. But yeah, again, some of those type of things you can look at. The fact is, it's possible to make things very accessible. It just takes gaining that experience, knowledge, and confidence in doing that.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. Appreciate Nitya and Tim, all your insights today, and for getting through all these really great questions. I know it was a long Q&A period that we had, so appreciate your thinking about those questions in a really thoughtful way. Again, we will share the recording and slides from today's webinar via email, so keep an eye out for that. And I want to thank Nitya and Tim again for their time. Really great presentation today. So thank you all. I hope you have a great rest of your day.